Clear prop.
073, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and Designated Pilot Examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic. Last week I had the great opportunity to get current in all things aviation for the most part. Got a little bit of work left to do on my IPC, but I did that with our assistant chief, Gio Handel, who is joining us on the show today. Thanks for joining us, Gio.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a treat to come back here and talk shop.
That's right. So if you don't remember, Gio's full-time job is an air traffic controller here in Houston. He works at Houston Center. He is an air traffic control instructor and the union rep here for his sector. So he knows a lot about ATC, aviation. And when we were doing our work for my flight review and my IPC, I thought that some of the things you were telling me were very interesting and things that I don't think about as a pilot. Because you are an avid and active GA pilot, you have a very interesting view on the world of airspace and aviation and all that stuff. You talk to Wallies of the world all day, every day up high, but you're also thinking about us guys down low on a regular basis too. So we're going to talk some best practices today. We might go off on some tangents, but we're going to have a good conversation with an air traffic controller. Wally, anything that's top of mind for you before we jump into some of these best practices as it relates to GEO?
Yeah, one thing that we were discussing earlier is one of the maneuvers, one of the things that we're required to test on a private and commercial check ride is emergency landings. So we're out in the practice area. We've done some maneuvers, stalls, steep turns, all that good stuff, and then we say, okay, we've just lost our engine. What are we going to do? And by and large, most people will say, I'm going to pitch for best airspeed. I'm going to look for a best place to land. I'm going to pull out the checklist. And somewhere after all that gets done, they think about communicating with people, whether it be via the transponder or via the VHF comm. And I would say 95% of them, that's an informal number, but the vast majority of people are going to say, I'm going to switch over to 121.5 and declare an emergency. And so you might hear, Mayday, 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 Cessna 123, Alpha Charlie, 10 miles west of the lake going down in a field. And, we'll debrief that we may have been on a frequency. We may have been on the local tower, and maybe we didn't really need to make that change to 121.5. So, Gio, talk to us a little bit about who is monitoring 121.5, and if you think that would be the best practice to switch frequencies. If you were, let's say you just left a Class D airport and you already had tower in the radio, and maybe you don't have a squawk code assigned by the tower, but you just left.
Oh, and the best question of all is, what would you do in that situation? not what are you recommending? What are you going to do in that situation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And what I generally tell people is, whenever you have an emergency, if you're already talking to an air traffic facility, whether it be tower, approach, or whatever it is, they are the best people to be helping you in that moment. So I generally would say avoid just switching to 121.5 because, number one, that's unexpected. If you have an emergency and you have flight following, you're squawked up, we know your call sign, and we can help you the best that we can. We can put a tag right on the radar scope where you're at. Now, what happens when you switch from your squawk code you were given to emergency squawk 7700, you're essentially changing your tag for us. And now we're going to see, yeah, you have an emergency, but now we're kind of running what's going on. And not every sector has 121.5. And to answer Wally's question, who's monitoring that? Well, it's just controllers. we all have our normal frequencies, and certain sectors they have 1 to 1.5, and they're monitoring it. Now, my area, my whole sector of expertise, they don't have 1 to 1.5. So if someone leaves my frequency to declare emergency, I don't know where they're at. And it's actually happened before where someone did that, and someone from Laredo sector, which is hundreds and hundreds of miles from where my airspace is at, they called me and said, hey, this guy is declaring emergency. Do you want to talk to him? I'm like, yeah, put him back on me. And he comes right back to the frequency, and we end up helping him out. But there was a few minutes where I was like, I have no idea where this guy went. He could have crashed. I have no idea. So,
and when you say sector, because I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know if all the pilots listening really know what you mean by sector. It's not a 2D sector. It's not down on the sectional map. The sectors might be 3-dimensional, right? You might not cover from 60,000 feet all the way to surface, right? You have a third dimension of that pie up high, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I asked this question in your flight review. There's a rocket ship at Hooks and it goes straight up in the air. Tell me all the airspace you're going to hit, and obviously you're going to hit the D, the B, the E, and eventually up to Class A airspace. And it's the same for air traffic control. So if you send a rocket straight up from the ground, there's usually someone monitoring from the surface up to a certain altitude, and typically it'll be an approach control sector. And then once you get up to the higher, tens and to the flight levels, you're talking to another sector. And then once you get up to even higher, you're talking to a high sector. And then now with more and more airplanes able to go into the flight levels, flight level 450, 470, we have ultra high sectors, which go from 36,000 feet and above. So you can literally go look straight up, and there's multiple controllers working airspace straight up. So it's sometimes it's very complex, and that's why I say if you have an emergency, stay with the guy that you're talking to, and because who knows who's going to pick you up. Now, if you're flying VFR, been 1,200 for 2 hours, you're going to visit your uncle's ranch in West Texas, and you have an engine failure, you don't know who you need to talk to, absolutely 121.5 7700, and we'll be able to find you. But generally stay on your squawk code and tell us, mayday, 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 or tell us what's happening, and we'll be able to help you out.
Perfect. So don't even go to 7700 on the squawk. Keep everything as is. Just keep talking to the person I'm talking to. I'm probably going to get the most help that I can get right there. Generally speaking, there are certain cases, but for the most part, if you're squawking and talking to someone, stay where you're at. Perfect. Well, a lot of what we wanted to talk about were best practices, and we've had a number of conversations where you and the team here in Houston have come and chatted with us. Some of this might not be rocket science for the pilot community out there, but it is the basics that's going to help us all be better pilots and better friends with ATC and get more help. What do you hear? Let's just start with some of the best practices. What's the one big mistake that you see as a flight instructor in GA, as a participant in GA, that just makes you cringe, Gio, when you hear it or see it on the radio?
Yeah, that's funny, because that's when I tell people I'm an air traffic controller, the number one question I get is it stressful? And then number two, it's what's your pet peeves? And a lot of these best practices kind of came out of that, because pet peeves for me means I'm getting annoyed, and I don't really get annoyed with a lot of this stuff, but it's stuff I really wish pilots would implement more and would make you a better communicator. But number one for me is listen before you transmit. And what that means is if you're switching frequencies, if we just handed you off to somebody else, take a second, listen to what's going on. Is it busy? Is it slow? Is there an emergency on frequency? And if that's the case, take a second, let them handle that. Because for the most part, if you're just checking in and you're level at 4,500, that's very low priority. We're going to roger you and give you an altimeter almost 100% of the time. So just give it a second and listen. And I know airline pilots are really good at this. For the most part, I know there's probably some exceptions, but they listen and they kind of get a feel for what's going on in the frequency.
And if I'm on a squawk code, the example I use all the time, I'm going to Austin and I'm going through different approach sectors, I'm sure they know I'm in their sector. They've already seen me. Yeah. I've got a squawk code. If I don't talk to them, which has never happened, if I forgot to check in, but they're going to check in with me. They're going to say, hey, 149 uniform, you on with me yet? It's not like they're going to lose me because I don't check in, right? Checking in doesn't do anything other than establish that communication, right?
Yeah.
So it's not something that I have to do immediately, urgently. There's plenty of time there, I guess. Right?
Yeah. And funny enough, sometimes we'll give someone a frequency change, and they will literally hold down the push to talk, switch the frequency while they're doing it, and I'll hear the end of their call to the previous controller and check on with us. That means they literally just held down the push to talk the whole time and switch frequencies. So don't do that. And what I tell my students when they check on really quickly, I'm like, how many milliseconds did you wait before checking on? So they think we want you right away. It's okay. Take a few seconds, get a feel for the radio, and we'll really appreciate it.
Perfect. So that can't be the only one. Let's go to the next one.
Yeah. So number 2 for me is have an idea of what you're going to say. And what I tell my students is push to talk. It's not push to think. So if you're struggling with radio communications, get an idea of what you're going to say. And if you can get ahead of that, you can start thinking already of what ATC is going to tell you. So let's say you're on ground control and they tell you contact tower when you're number 1. Well, once you go there, like I said before, take a second, listen to what's going on in tower. If they're giving a takeoff clearance or whatever it may be, think about, okay, what do I need to say? Okay, I'm holding short of here and I'm ready for takeoff. All right. And then what are they going to tell you? They're either going to tell you 2 things. Either you're clear for takeoff or you need to stand by or hold short. So you can already get an idea of what you need to say. And if you need to have a pen and paper and write down what you need to say, that's fine. And ATC communications, it's intimidating for a lot of student pilots. And I tell them it's a lot like learning a new language. You're not going to get it on the first try. You're going to have to really practice and get reps in before you really get comfortable.
Yeah, that brings up a good question. You may not know the answer to this. I don't know if you do, but I've wondered the answer to this question. So I'm at the whole shoreline on the runway. I know I'm number 1. It's my turn. And there's one of my aircraft coming on short final and another one right behind it. I'm holding short. I'm now number 1. The other plane's gone. Should I check in or do I wait for these other planes to land? I know they're going to tell me to stand by. Does the tower want to know that I'm really ready, or do they want me to wait? Or what should I do in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this, I will have to just tell you what I do because I've never worked at tower.
Right.
So generally, if I just checked in, and I'll give an example. If someone just took off, they're rolling down the runway.
Yep.
I'm not going to check in right away because I know they can't. They're just going to tell me to stand by. I'll wait till they get off in the air, and get going. Now it gets a little more tricky when there's someone on final because how far out are they? And to an extent, you don't want to do ATC's job and be like, okay, I can fit in this gap, which it's really tempting for me as a controller because I'm always, okay, they could have fit me in there.
Right.
But if you're not sure, just check in, tell them, hey, holding short, and then they'll make the sequence. But generally, if you see someone on final, they're probably not going to try to squeeze you out of there really quickly.
Right.
But I guess it really depends on who's working the tower.
Okay, good feedback. Number 3 in your best practice list.
Number 3, be clear, concise, and precise. So what does that even mean? So it means don't clog up airtime with extra unnecessary verbiage. And a lot of these, they kind of build on each other. If you know what you're going to say, if you've already listened to the frequency, you're going to check in and be really quick and not going to have a lot of those ahs and ums. And, a lot of times I'll hear, oh, let's see, we're about 10 miles we're actually 20 miles to the south. And a lot of times I understand you're trying to figure it out on the fly. And in the GA community, most of the time we're single pilots. So we're doing a lot. Our hands are moving a lot. So it's hard to kind of get ahead of the airplane all the time. But, try not to clog up with extra verbiage. Always use your call sign. And I think tower and pretty much every air traffic controller in the world will appreciate always using your call sign. I can't tell you how many times where someone says, oh, hey, we're picking up severe turbulence. And I'll say, who's picking up severe turbulence? It's United 452. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, now I'll tell you what the better rides are, but always use your call sign. It's crucial we maintain aircraft identity. And when you do these things, you're clear, concise, you listen, you know what you got a window to check in. you're making a good first impression with air traffic control. So if you have a pretty tricky request, if you need to do 10 practice approaches, they're going to be like, okay, this guy's on top of it. And I can tell you, if you come in there and you're giving wrong directions and you're and eyeing and you're messing up a lot of us are like, oh boy, here we go.
So unable to help today. Sorry.
No, I mean we all do a good job of helping everyone out, but and this also means knowing your cardinal directions. I've been guilty of this where I look quickly at a map and maybe I have it track up instead of north up, and I say I'm northeast of the field when I'm really southeast or southwest. That's a big deal. A lot of airports don't have any sort of radar in there, so they're taking you at your word that you're really southwest, not northeast. So make sure you really get that point across. And lastly, with this point, for all the instrument pilots out there, you have to remember the time when you were that student pilot or private pilot. If you say you're inbound on the VOR Alpha and you're 25 miles east of Gaboo, not a lot of VFR pilots are going to know what you're talking about. Use directions from the airport or from a VOR. That's a lot more clear and concise. It'll help the pilots in the area know what you're talking about versus if you just talk about a random fix or an instrument approach, because I've experienced this in the Midwest flying out there, and someone said I'm inbound on the GPS and I'm X north of the fix. I have no idea where it's at. I'd ask them, okay, how far are you from the airport? And that's a lot more clear and concise.
And do you think that some of that not being clear and concise is people trying to sound too pilot-like, too cool? They're trying to rattle it off like they know what they're doing and not using some just normal language.
Yeah, and I think that plays a part. And, I think a lot of it too is when you're out there flying, you're just thinking, okay, I'm flying the instrument approach procedure. Okay, I'm 10 north of Gaboo right now, and I'm flying the approach. And that's what comes across. But, take a second. You have to think, like I said, not everyone's an IFR pilot or is familiar with all the approaches in Houston. For the most part, if you're flying at a busy flight school, we'll kind of know what's going on in the area, but that's generally not the story with every pilot that's flying out there.
And then one of my pet peeves, I'll say it is something that annoys me, is the person that's trying to be too cute on the radio, maybe like, hey, I'm ready for departure. I'm going to get out of here, or something. Adding a little bit of gotcha in there.
Yep.
That can't be good for the whole system, can it?
Generally speaking, it's not. There is a time and a place for it. I mean, for all the people that listen to live ATC, if you listen to a lot of the frequencies, there's a lot of fun that goes on when it's, airline just checking on. I'll get a lot of times they'll say, hey, this is United 254, flight level 360. How you doing? And, it doesn't bother me. And now if I'm busy, yeah, it's a whole different story. But for the most part, I think they're listening. They know it's slow. That's fine. So like I said, there's a time and a place, but generally, let's try to keep it to the pilot controller glossary and use our proper phraseology.
All right. Number 4, never
assume. This is a big one because there's been so many accidents that could have been prevented with not making assumptions. And I think I may have brought this up in the last podcast, but Avianca Flight 52, and for everyone at home, you can look it up on Wikipedia, and there's actually a YouTube video of the ATC recording of this airliner trying to get into New York, and this was years and years ago. They were holding for a long time, and they finally got in to shoot the approach. They got down, couldn't see the runway, went missed. They checked on with New York TRACON, which is just approach, and they said, we're 2,500 for 4,000, and approach gave them a vector, and they said, okay, and we're running out of fuel. Well, what does that mean? Are you literally running out of fuel, or are you minimum fuel, or are you emergency fuel? And it turns out the pilot, literally, they were out of fuel, and they ended up flaming out both engines and crashing in a neighborhood. And I think if they would have used emergency fuel, it could have completely changed the whole situation. And for everyone out there who doesn't really know this type of phraseology, so when you're talking about fuel, there's really two situations that ATC needs to know about. It's minimum fuel. And if you say your minimum fuel, that means, okay, I can't take any extra unnecessary delays, and we'll avoid delays as possible. But I will say, for if there's any airline pilots out there, I hear minimum fuel all the time, especially during weather days. Everyone's getting reroutes. It happens. Maybe they try to shoot an approach, stay diverted, whatever it may be. Minimum fuel isn't all that rare. Now, emergency fuel, that is, you're declaring emergency for fuel, and I'm moving everybody out of the way for you. You're going straight to final. So using clear communication like that, and not assuming that every air traffic controller knows what you're talking about. And I think the best example is if you tell ATC, hey, my oil pressure is running low. To most, they don't know what that means, because not all of air traffic controllers are pilots. But if you say, I may lose an engine, or I'm losing my engine, that's a whole different story.
That kind of makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
No
So,
question.
or if you say, hey, my ammeter is jumping around. Well, I don't, most ATC don't know what an ammeter is. So, identify the problem and say, what is the worst case situation? If your ammeter is going crazy, maybe you can lose your electrics, and maybe you only have, 15 to 30 minutes of electricals left. So, never assume we're all, we know what you're saying. And, and the other big thing I think for GA pilots is if you get a vector and let's say you're doing a practice approach and it points you towards a cloud, don't assume you're on an IFR clearance. If you're VFR flight following, we can't see those clouds on our radar scope. Mm-hmm. So you have to tell us, hey, I'm about to fly into a cloud. I need to descend, or I need to go to the left or something. You're the PIC. You have to maintain the clearances from the clouds, and just because we point you in that direction doesn't mean you can fly through it.
Yeah, that's a good tip. And a lot of times on fly following, I'll tell them I'm going to have to change altitude because I see this big white puffy thing in front of me that I'm going to have to divert around for sure. And they might see something, maybe not the ATC. You might see something on the map, but you got to tell them that you need to get out of it. You can't do that.
Yeah, I think that would end for a short check ride if Wally had an applicant go keep flying through a cloud if they thought ATC meant they could.
I've actually had that happen. The young man, we flew right into a cloud, and we landed and we discussed it, and his reasoning was, well, the ATIS said it was 3,500 broken, and we were at 2,000 feet. The cloud shouldn't have been there. I kid you not. And I said, well, the cloud was there.
Surely even that young man or woman knew that the weathermen aren't always right.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Number 5 is slow it down. What does that mean, Gio?
Absolutely. So talk deliberately and clearly. And so whenever I first became an air traffic controller, I talked very fast. And I was like, you know what? These pilots just need to listen quicker because I'm going to rip off these clearances. And that led to a lot of struggles for me where I had to keep saying things over and over again. And I think this applies to pilots. You don't have to talk fast. Talk deliberately and clearly. For an example, Houston approach, Cessna 919 Tango Charlie, 10 miles east of Navasota, 4,500, like to pick up flight following. Said everything clearly, slowly, and they can get the point. But if you start rattling off clearances, or if you start rattling off all this information, we're going to ask you say again, because maybe we're talking to somebody else. We only caught a part of it. So, and that's the big thing. If you're picking up flight following, and this is a question I get all the time, how do I pick up flight following? What's the best way to do it? And number one thing is say your call sign slowly and clearly. Now, I don't mean drag it out, November, Niner. No, you don't have to do that. Just clearly enunciate it. Leave a little bit of space between the numbers and the letters. Because that's we need your call sign and your location to really start everything. So say it slowly and clearly, and just remember there's a difference between clogging up the frequency with chatter and talking clearly and concisely. So if you talk clear and concise, no air traffic controller is going to get upset with you. And you can ask ATC to say again as many times as you need. Like I said, I was a fast talker and I still talk fast at times, but if you say again and I keep hearing it, then I'm going to know, oh, I'm talking way too fast. No one's catching what I'm saying, and I'll start slowing it down. And I think there's that old cliche of slow down to go faster, right? So I think that applies in a lot of cases with air traffic communications.
And that won't frustrate you, or won't frustrate the majority of ATC people if we ask you to repeat?
Oh, no. And if it does, then so what? I always say an annoyed controller is better than a pilot deviation. So never guess, never think the call's for you. Say again, it's fine. I think airline pilots are great at this, because if they're not sure, they have the luxury of 2 pilots in there, but they'll say, hey, just confirm you said flight level 190. So I think GA pilots can really benefit from, just double checking.
And the terminology when you do want the controller to say something again is say again.
Yeah.
So would you say again for 123 Bravo Charlie? Or if you have received a clearance, or you think you've received, but you're not 100%, just say, just confirm 123 Bravo Charlie is cleared to land 17 right. And so confirm and say again is the phraseology, as opposed to repeat. Would you repeat? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that going to communicate probably fine with the controller? It is, and the controller will probably repeat it. But a lot of our student pilots are pursuing professional flying jobs, and or careers, I should say, and you're going to be flying in foreign countries where the controller you're talking to has a limited, may have limited English knowledge. So we need to try to stay within the proper phraseology.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, international flying, I don't think about that often. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Number 6, be patient.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go on YouTube and go to the United Flight Shorts, there's a short where I'm with another air traffic controller and we pick up flight following. And whenever we try to get it, we go through, say, our call sign slowly and do all this. We wait a minute, nothing, 2 minutes, and then finally the air traffic controller gets back to us. Okay, Cessna 919 Tango Charlie, say again. So the whole point of saying be patient is, a lot of times controllers are talking to people on different frequencies. At any given time, I could be working 3 to up to 8 frequencies. So maybe you don't hear us talking to somebody else, but maybe we're getting a clearance. And that goes back to the very first one, listen. So if you hear us give a clearance and you don't hear anything back, that doesn't mean that the clearance is done. It means someone's probably reading it back on a different frequency. So if you don't hear anything, give it a second before you try again. And this is as close to a pet peeve, if there is one, is when someone checks in and they say, Houston Center, this is November 105 Alpha Foxtrot, and I'm talking to somebody else, and then literally 5 seconds later, Houston Center, November 105 Alpha Foxtrot, still doing, and they keep going, and I'm just trying to talk to another airplane, and we're stepping on each other, right? So we'll get to you, and if we really need you, we'll reach out to you, like you said before. If we need something, we can reach out, but give us a second before you check in. Now, don't take it to an extreme. Don't wait 10 minutes on frequency for us to get back to you. We probably missed it, but it's okay to give it a second. And it goes back to the very first one, listen before you speak.
And the other thing about that is, if ATC is not responding to you, make sure your volume is up.
Oh yeah,
because I've seen this many times, and I've probably been guilty of it. You make the call, and ATC calls you back, but you don't hear them because you've inadvertently turned your volume down, and then you call them again. Well, you don't hear them, so now you've stepped on them, so now you've messed up other communication.
I'm sitting here smiling because I know I've done this, and I don't want to admit it, but at the same time, I'm going to admit it. You get to where you're flying, an hour trip to Austin, and you're talking about things, and you're showing off the whiz-bang avionics in there, and you turn on XM radio, and the whole time you kind of turn this down, and next time you check in, you don't hear anything back, and you're frustrated, or you're like, okay, now I'm getting worried. What's going on? And it is a real deal. We've all been there. We've all done that for sure. The word unable, what about that? Number 7, don't hesitate to use unable.
Oh, 100%. Never accept the clearance if you are unsure if you can comply. And this is a big one. For everyone out there that wants to fly jets one day, you're gonna start getting issued crossing restrictions. These are hard restrictions where you'll be at 36,000 feet, and we'll clear you when you're maybe 100 miles away. Hey, cross marks at 13,000. And if you read that back, we're counting on you to hit that fix at 13,000 feet. So if you're not sure you can do it, say unable. We can work out another plan. We have plan B through Z through all the other letters of all the other alphabets. We can figure something out. For student pilots at airports with multiple runways, if you get a last minute runway change, if you're all set up, hey, unable. If you need to go around, but don't try and do a fighter pilot maneuver to land on another runway. It's okay to say unable. I mean, Wally, have you ever had to say unable while you're
yeah, many times.
Yeah. So don't put the plane or your passengers in an uncomfortable position. And I will say, I've never done this, but I've never. You don't want to get a late crossing restriction because maybe air traffic control forgot to give you one. Again, I've never done this ever in my career, but if you get a late one, sometimes we know we messed up, and we can call and communicate this with approach and say, hey, that crossing restriction that we agreed upon. Hey, is it okay if he's a little bit high? And for the most part, it's no issue.
Yeah.
Now, if you're sitting there at 36,000 feet and you're over the airport, yeah, you're probably going to need a little vectors to help you get down. But yeah, don't hesitate to say unable, especially with weather deviations. I mean, whenever I was flying the Piper Arrow back from Florida, there was a massive thunderstorm, and we were in the clear going around, the north side of it, and ATC gave me a heading. I said, okay, turn 30 degrees left vectors for traffic. I look to my left and I see a big scary cloud off my left side, and I immediately say unable. I got to storm off my side. And he goes, sir, this is for traffic. And he kept pushing me to go to the left, and I had to stay firm, say unable. I'm not going to go that way. And they made a new plan. Maybe I got vectored more. Maybe he got annoyed with me, but I wasn't comfortable going that direction. And especially when you start flying bigger and faster airplanes, and you're going to be getting closer to weather, you're going to have to know how to say unable, because sometimes we're going to have to fit you in tight windows, and it's ultimately it's fine if you have to go a little bit extra, but don't get forced into a thunderstorm, because obviously it's not a good position to be in. And just remember, 91.3, the PIC is the final authority for the safety of flight. Always keep that in mind. You fly the airplane, we'll do everything else for you. So unable, and you're going to say it at one point in your career if you fly long enough, and don't avoid it because you think you're going to make us upset.
Yeah, well, just communicate with the controller. You gave the example of 13,000 at marks. A lot of times we may get a crossing restriction, cross marks at 13,250 knots, and you've got a late descent. You look at it and you go, well, that's not going to work. Just tell the controller, hey, we can give you 13,000 or we can give you 250, but we can't give you both. And a lot of times they'll tell you what's more important. They'll say, okay, we need the altitude more than we need the airspeed. So you cross marks at 13,000 at 330 knots and slow down as you can. So just effective communication.
Yeah, and part of that is really kind of leads into number 8 here, ask for help when you need it. We kind of talked a little bit before we started recording about some incidents and how air traffic control can make every best effort, but sometimes still make it hard for the pilot. We talked about Tammy Jo Schultz, and in her incident that she had, the air traffic controllers kept changing her frequency. And she was the pilot in command and said, look, guys, no more frequency changes. And that was her way of asking for help. Like, there was a lot going on that day for her. And no matter how much experience she had, that has to be overwhelming as a pilot to be in an incident that is truly an emergency. But she may be told for help instead of asked for help. She said no more frequency changes. What do you suggest a pilot does when they need help?
Yeah, and I think the key word here is I'm declaring an emergency. And that this is granted if it is a true emergency. So there's plenty of other situations where you can ask for help. Like I said, airline pilots, they have the luxury of having another person in the cockpit with them. But for the most of us, we're by ourselves. Maybe you're single pilot IMC, you got one radio, and you need to get ATIS. Well, you know what? If you ask me for the ATIS, I will read it to you most of the time. If we're not too busy, that goes into additional services. But, I can get that at my sector with literally just maybe 6 letters. I just type in the airport ID and hit WR, and I get the full METAR, and I can read you the weather. Houston Approach, they actually have the ATISs. They can tell you, all the ATIS information. If you need NOTAMs, this is a big one. You can ask for it. If you're asked, do you have the weather and NOTAMs? This is not a trap. They're not trying to get you on a regulation. They really want to know if you actually have the NOTAMs. And those can change in flight. Maybe you take off and everything's fine, and then when you get there, maybe there's a disabled aircraft on the runway. Maybe the runway lights are out, or the approach lighting system's out, and that changes the minimums for the approach. So ask for the NOTAMs. They get updated in real time, and you can easily have ATC help you. I mean, there's other services too. During football season, I get asked for the scores of games all the time. we can pass that on. Now, don't make a habit of that, but there's a lot of extra fun stuff that we can do. But we're a service-oriented organization, so use us. We're not air police. Think of us as a part of your crew.
How deep do you go in the sports world? Like, can you give me curling statistics? Or, like, what sports do I have to stop asking questions about?
Oh, football, I'll give you the full stat line. I'll tell you how Ezekiel Elliott did on the last play, or I'll give you my thoughts on a lot of the games. No, I'm joking, but
start a betting line.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
There's actually a controller. This was years ago. I want to say it was Albuquerque Center. I used to fly a lot of L.A. red-eyes, so you'd leave here at 7 o'clock at night, you fly to L.A., and then you turn around and come back and get home at 5 in the morning. But there was again, I think it was Albuquerque Center that had a joke every night, and you talk to them, and you usually hear another airplane say, "What's the joke of the night?" And I still remember one of his jokes, and it was, "What did the fish say when he ran into the concrete wall?"
I don't know what.
What did he say?
Damn.
There you go.
Anyway, that came from Albuquerque Center. Thank you, ATC.
All right, the last two, number 9 and 10, we'll just put those together, Gio, and wrap up the show after that. Number 9.
So number 9, aviate, navigate, then communicate. Long pause there. So fly the airplane. And for the instrument students out there, really even the private pilots, student pilots, if you get a frequency change and you have to run a checklist, run the checklist, then check on. Don't feel rushed to check on, miss your checklist, and then you're behind the airplane. A lot of times, if I get a frequency change, and let's say I'm going to College Station, I'll check the ATIS real quick, then I'll check on. I already have the ATIS, so don't feel rushed to immediately get on. Always fly the airplane. And another big one is, if you're by yourself, don't try to copy a clearance and taxi at the same time. Navigate to the runway, navigate to where you come to a full stop, and then you can write it down. You don't want to be texting and flying, right? So,
which is funny because they, even on fly followings around here, if I'm, I can imagine myself now testing my brakes and I'm on the roll, and they're, hey, we have your fly following information when you're ready to copy. You feel obligated to do that quickly, right? And
yes.
There's nothing wrong with saying unable, I'll get it at the Delta ramp. It's not going to change anything.
And you can see where these all melt together. Say it's okay to say unable. Unable, I'll get in a second. Or they usually advise, are you ready to copy? And negative, no.
Yeah. But in reality, I guess what I'm saying, in reality, how many times do you hear that? Very rare, if ever. Mm-hmm. And I think that creates opportunity for distraction and damage, right? Like, we really should just say, no, I'm going to get it in a minute. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And then for the last one, I'll give a bonus one with, you have to remember that air traffic airspace, as we mentioned, is complex, and it goes out further than you actually think. And we want to talk to you for that reason. Generally, you'll never annoy us if you check on and you're at 12,500 feet and you're just doing maneuvers. We want to talk to you. And this is something Bobby and I, and actually Wally, we all had a conversation about this before the show of if there's an aircraft flying at 12,500 just outside the Bravo, doing maneuvers. Little did they know they were right in the arrival path of all the hobby aircraft. Now, let me preface this as maybe there's someone at home saying that's perfectly legal, 100% legal, but is it the safest thing to do? Because what I saw for the next 10 minutes was very interesting as those targets came nose to nose, and the Southwest flight had a RA, and maybe Wally, you can give us a little more information as what a RA is for the people who don't know out there, and what happens in the cockpit.
Yeah, well, we have a traffic avoidance system, called TCAS, and we get two kinds of alerts. We get what we call a TA, which is a traffic advisory. If within traffic was in a certain proximity, we're alerted to it. That's kind of a yellow alert. A TA is a yellow alert, if you will. An RA is a resolution advisory. In other words, the computers of the two airplanes are talking to each other, or the traffic avoidance systems are talking to each other, and it has come up with a solution, and it tells airplane A to climb, airplane B to descend, or maybe stay level, but definitely don't climb. And on our display, we'll have a thing, and we'll have an oral warning. It'll say climb, 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 or descend, descend, descend. So it's resolution advisory is a big deal. In my airline career, I've had maybe 2 or 3 of them. So
they're not optional, I assume.
No. The one that tells you to do something, you got to do something. So yeah, it's definitely a big deal. But like as you said, Gio, I mean, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's smart, doesn't mean it's safe. I fly my general aviation airplane. A lot of times I go to the southwest side of Houston, and I fly between the airspace between 2 Class D airports, north of Hooks and south of Conroe. And if they're landing to the north, I know I'm on the approach path for Conroe. If we're landing to the south, I know I'm flying right in the approach path for Hooks. And again, I'm legal. I'm below the Bravo. I'm out of the Delta. But if I'm coming across at 1,800 feet and they're landing south at Hooks, I know I'm right in the approach path. So I call up the tower and let them know, hey, I'm out here, I'm coming across. And they may say, okay, thank you very much.
Just smart pilotage is all that really is.
Yeah.
Well, Gio, thanks for joining us again on the show. As always, if you're out there, be nice to your air traffic controllers. Jump on and say hi. They probably want to talk to you more than you want to talk to them, and make sure you're as safe as you can be. Fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.